this morning. There'll be another Security Council meeting this afternoon. And I expect that the international community will speak with one voice in expressing its ongoing alarm at events as they unfold in Libya.
What is the Secretary doing?
That's P.J. Crowley of U.S. State Department talking, first of all, of the movements of U.S. citizens, evacuating U.S. citizens out of Libya, and the plans that he has been put in place to help U.S. citizens depart the country. He was asked the question about Gaddafi's speech, really skirted around it, didn't make much of that, tried to not to talk about that, and then was asked a more direct question about what the questioner said was essentially a bloodbath in Libya. What is the US doing? Is there urgency? And P.J. Crowley saying, of course there is urgency. Our first priority is US citizens, and the international community will be addressing this issue as one when the UN meets for a second time today. Let's bring in AlJazeera's White House correspondent, Patty Culhane. Patty, we've heard some pretty vehement words from some around the world, but nothing too strong coming there from the White House.
And interestingly, nothing at all coming from President Barack Obama. It hasn't been since Friday when he put out a statement saying that the governments of Bahrain, Libya, and Yemen should show restraint. But in the cases of Yemen and Bahrain, the president has picked up the phone and talked to those leaders. We didn't see him do that. He was speaking in public about small businesses today. He didn't address the issue of Libya. We don't expect he's going to. Secretary of State Clinton, as you mentioned, should in the next hour and a half. So it seems that he's letting the State Department do the talking on this. Now, there have been a lot of questions about this, and you can see what the administration's trying to do. They're repeating what they've been saying, is that it's not for the U.S. to weigh in, to tell the people who their leader should be. But it is interesting at the same time that in Egypt, that President Obama did get involved. First, they backed the Mubarak regime. After that, they said that President Mubarak shouldn't run for re-election. Then they pushed for an orderly transition. So in Egypt, in Bahrain, in Yemen, where the allies are, you've seen President Obama pick up the phone, make public comments. There is a fear in the White House that if President Obama is to speak about that, he would delegitimize the aspirations of the protesters. They would be able to say this was an American movement and delegitimize it that way. So that is something that I can tell you is going on in their thinking.
The truth is, of course, that the White House has very little leverage when it comes to Libya altogether.
Well, exactly. It does not have a relationship. After all, for decades, there were open hostilities. It was just during the Bush administration that they reestablished some sort of diplomatic relations with Libya. So they don't have those personal relationships. They don't give a tremendous amount of aid, just a few $100,000 for weapons programs. So they really don't feel that they have the leverage. So that's why I think you see them really pushing all of the focus to the United Nations.
Interesting, John Kerry saying what he has been saying. He's been a lot more vocal about it, and he was, of course, vocal during the whole Egyptian crisis when that was really underway, and it seems to have been used as a spokesman in that case. What do you think is happening this time?
Well, and that is exactly the case. Sometimes when the administration feels that they can't make those statements publicly, they'll look to Senator John Kerry. After all, he's in charge of the Foreign Relations Committee, a very influential senator. I'm told from people in the White House that is not the case this time, but we have seen an incredibly strong statement from Senator Kerry, not just condemning the violence, but calling for action. He's saying the Gaddafi regime is done, but at the same time, he is sending a message to the military leaders, which was a little bit different, saying that they could face war crimes if they continue to attack their people. He's calling on the oil companies to suspend their operations. He wants the U.S. to impose sanctions along with the UN. He's pushing for an immediate flow of humanitarian goods from the United Nations, and he's also trying to step up the pressure on the African Union and the Arab League. So concrete steps being called on by Senator John Kerry, but not from the Obama administration.
Patty, just briefly, it's interesting, isn't it, because we in the world media are dealing with pretty flimsy information coming out of Libya, but you have to imagine that the US government, the administration, would have a lot more information, satellite information and so on and so forth. How much more are they working with, do you think?
Well, you would think that, but it was interesting during Egypt when they thought that during that speech that former President Mubarak was going to step down. They all thought that here at the White House, and then he didn't. And when pushed on that, the press secretary actually stood in the briefing room and said, we were talking to the same people in Egypt that you were talking to. Now, whether or not they don't have any better sources than that, he wasn't pushed on that, but they have publicly said in Libya that is a question for them because there aren't the journalists. They're talking to Human Rights Watch to try and get their information. So as it seems that the U.S. government doesn't really, at least publicly, they're saying they don't really have the sources to really figure out what's going on there.
All right, Patty, leave it there for the moment. Back with you as the day goes on. More to discuss later, I'm sure. It's Patty Culhane at the White House. Well, the United Nations Security Council due to hold a closed-door meeting to discuss the situation in Libya. On Monday, the deputy Libyan ambassador to the UN broke ties with the Libyan regime. He called the attacks on the Libyan people, quotes, genocide. Well, in the last few hours, the actual Libyan ambassador has spoken. He did not break with the Libyan leader, but Abdulrahman Shalgam said he had spoken with Gaddafi and told him that now is a time for reform.
I told him, Muhammad, we've grown old. Let's give an opportunity to the youth. He told me, we give opportunities to our sons. I told him, my children aren't with us. My children want change. And he told me, so do my children. During these difficult circumstances, when I see people, these sycophants who used to kiss his hands and his head, those bastards have now betrayed us. They are dogs. They've betrayed us. I spoke with Saif al-Islam for 5 hours. We must create a constitution, give people a chance to have a free media, to create a true democracy. This is our country. We cannot kill our children. I'm talking about all levels. I am pressuring all government officials to stop the violence.
Well, earlier, the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon did speak out about the developments in Libya. He harshly criticized the actions of Gaddafi's regime.
I have seen very disturbing and shocking scenes where Libyan authorities have been firing at demonstrators from the warplanes and helicopters. This is unacceptable. This must stop immediately. This is a serious violation of international humanitarian law.
Well, let's get more from the United Nations now. We're joined by AlJazeera's Scott Heidler. He's there just following developments as and when they occur. We've already had one meeting, Scott, today. Tidy up for us what's happened and what's about to happen.
Yeah, well, this morning's meeting was about 9 a.m. local time here in New York, and that was more procedural. What they plotted out is the meeting at 3 p.m., and that's the main meeting for the Security Council in dealing with Libya. Now, we're hearing that the Libyan mission to the United Nations will be part of a initial briefing along with the chief political officer here at the United Nations. Then after that, there'll be closed door. The whole thing is closed door, but then after that, there'll be deliberations, and most likely coming out of those deliberations with the 5 members of the Security Council will be a press statement and what's left to be determined, and what we're really kind of focused on right now within that press statement that all 15 members have to agree upon. Is there going to be a call to action? All this rhetoric out there from world leaders saying that the international community needs to do something. Will that be detailed in this statement coming out of the Security Council meeting in just about an hour and a half? And
some speculation that there will be some members who won't be interested in carrying this through. China, for example.
Yeah, and we saw this over the last couple of weeks when it came to dealing with the uprising in Egypt. China and Russia were very reluctant to have any kind of involvement when it came to what then they considered, in Egypt's case, a domestic issue. Here with Libya, we've got a couple of markers that clearly make it an international situation, a situation with international ramifications. We saw 2 aircraft defect with their pilots defect to Malta. We've got a situation where